thank you all. Thank you for inviting me. It's really my great privilege to be here today and to tell you about an emerging and new field of using AI to help measure human behavior. When you think about the last 20, 30 years and the rapid advances in science, in genetics, cell biology, neuroscience, it's just been inspiring and tremendous. When you think about the measurement of human behavior, we often feel like we're stuck in the 1950s. It really hasn't changed that much. Our main techniques are questionnaires and interviews. There's some tweaks around statistical modeling to make it better, but it really fundamentally hasn't changed. I was made excited about the possibility of using AI, actually from a young adult who has autism who was in my lab. And at that point, he was doing fMRI analyses. And he showed me one day how he could transpose his moving face onto a cartoon. And I'm like, wow, this is tremendous. Because we can now, I have studied kind of like the perception of faces and recognizing emotions, but the production of emotions and the productions of social communications, really you couldn't do. And now with AI, and this is not generative AI, but computer vision and kind of perceptual computing, we can do that. So I'm fortunate to work with a very large team. This row of pictures on the bottom here is my way of giving credit to all these people for contributing to this work. We have a unique team in one sense, in that we combine groups of engineers and data scientists with groups of psychologists. And that marriage is really, really effective. It's challenging because the cultures are different, but we've been able to do a lot. Today I'm going to talk about one aspect of our work. Okay. So when we think from a high level, what really is autism? It's what kids with autism can do well or not well, what they do too little or too much. A lot of details in the diagnostic criteria, but fundamentally you can kind of drill it down to that. Our problem, as I've already introduced, it's really hard to measure these things accurately. When you look at the field trials which validated the DSM-5, the rate of agreement between expert clinicians on whether someone has autism or not was just 69% corrected for error. When you look at mom and dad filling out the same survey form on symptoms, the rate of agreement is a correlation of about 0.5, which means that the majority of the information you're getting from those two is not overlapping. So this is really challenging to move forward with science if our measurements are not more quantitative, more granular, and more reliable. We all have come to understand that autism is a fuzzy construct. It's got a very broad severity range. It has arbitrary boundaries between autism and non-autism, and it has a high rate of other co-occurring conditions, particularly mental health conditions. So autism as a single entity doesn't exist, and the current clinical tools are not going to help us to understand that. So AI can provide objective measurements of defining behaviors. So when you think about what behavior is, the DSM as a system for diagnosing any kind of health condition relies on behaviors. And all behaviors, when you think about it, are really just movement. There's no behavior that I can think of that isn't expressed as a movement. Most of it's seen. Some of the time, it's not like your vocal cords move when you speak. It is a movement. We can capture that now with computer vision. This, by the way, is the gentleman I was talking to you about earlier, down below, showing how he can move. So computer vision is very objective, quantitative, scalable, brief, and efficient. So when we approach it from a computer vision point of view, how are we going to study behaviors, especially in autism? We have to also think about whether two different kinds of measurements. One is that measuring the social domain. The social domain really requires another person. So it's hard to have poor social communication skills if you're not talking to someone else, or to have social behavioral abnormalities if you're not already involved with someone. So you really can only measure social behavior in the context of an interaction, which presents some challenges. We call those dyadic behaviors. There's also monadic behaviors. These are things that really don't require the social context to express themselves. So things like repetitive behaviors, hyper-responsiveness or hypo-responsiveness to sensory stimuli. Oops, I think I might have gone too far. Okay. So when we think about the dyadic coordination between people when they're talking about it, we call that social coordination. It's known to be a nonverbal social signaling mechanism. Lots of research has shown that kids with autism, or individuals spontaneously coordinate their behaviors during conversations, which is not dissimilar from other species. So birds, flocks, fish, school, etc. And infants as young as 4 months of age start coordinating their behaviors to their parents. That early coordination developmental literature has shown provides a foundation for social learning, self-regulation, language learning, and other skills. And some studies have already started looking at the first year of life and suggest that social coordination's influenced and affected in kids with autism. So this is how we measure social coordination in samples of people having a conversation together. On the left there, you see a schematic of two people sitting across from each other. There's this little bidirectional camera, which is able to measure their voice, their speech, their movement. It also has a Bluetooth device in it, so it can sync to other kinds of data collecting devices, such as heart rate and heart rate variability. On the right there, we are measuring 180 different movements across the face. So the upper part of the face is divided into a left and right quadrant, and you can see the lady in the middle of the video. She's involved in a conversation. So these are the real-time data that we get when someone is conversing. Okay. So when we want to quantify this, we again look at monadic and dyadic kind of data. Monadic would be just analyzing the one person's face and asking how important is that in us understanding autism, making a prediction of autism. And in our lab, we've studied a sample of teens and a sample of adults. And in both cases, monadic does provide a significant prediction of whether a person is going to have autism. This is using machine learning. We're about 80% accurate after a 5-minute conversation by just looking at the movements of someone's face during a conversation. When we move to dyadic analyses, we do a cross-correlation between all the kinds of signals you're seeing on the screen between the two people, and we allow for things like time lag. And there, in those analyses, we're able to show in 5 minutes we're 90% accurate in detecting whether someone has autism. When we show these same movies to expert diagnosticians, people who know the ADOS well, they're only 82% accurate. So we're significantly more accurate than diagnosticians in this time period. One of the next steps, which is going to be important, is to scale this. It's very labor intensive to bring people into the lab and collect these kind of data. Even though the data is brief, it's still very labor intensive. So given that we're measuring videos, it's possible to collect data through video conferencing. This is important because it allows us to build larger models. It also allows us to ask more nuanced questions. So we have a fingerprint now of what it is to have autism and not be typically developing. But what about autism plus ADHD? What about autism plus intellectual disability? Those kinds of questions are going to need much, much larger samples. It's also the case as we move to put this into the clinic, we realize that this is a map on this one side showing the representation of where clinical services are available across the U.S. for kids with autism. So a lot of people who are far away from a clinic in more rural areas will greatly benefit from assessments that can be done virtually using video conferencing. This is the kind of data that we're collecting now. It shows the full body of the work we're doing. If you look in the center column of data there, that's all about linguistics and voice. So we can learn a lot, and there are differences between people with autism and the prosody of their voice, the acoustic properties of the voice, the loudness of their voice, the variability in the loudness, and also the language they use. They tend to use less social words, less social pronouns, and less what we call thinking words. So when you have a conversation that's recorded, you automatically get to study the human movements, and you get to study the language abilities. You can also have, as I've mentioned, a Bluetooth connection to a heart rate. We can look at heart rate variability, heart rate itself as a measure of arousal and anxiety. And we can measure the joint movements. We can look at measures of gestures and such. Okay. Is this going to run? No. Oh, it did. It just didn't on my screen. So in addition to measuring social behaviors, our lab also looks at motor functioning. We've got a big study going on for early detection of social behaviors, looking at social coordination. But at the same time, we're trying to measure gait and postural control. The classic way to measure gait is to use a gait mat. It's a pressure-sensitive mat. It's about 20 feet long, and it's got all these little sensors in it. So when you walk along it, you get these footprints, which you see down here on the bottom. On the top is a three-dimensional infant of walking along that gait mat. One of the important things is that this is not easily scalable. It's very heavy, the gait mat. It costs $40,000. But with a $300 camera at the end of the runway, we've been able to replicate the findings that you would get out of a gait mat. So it has to do with like step width, postural stability, step length, speed of walking. And we have shown that our computer vision method, the ICC, the interclass correlation, is 0.99. So it really gives you all that value. Plus, it gives you the whole body measurement up top. These kids were measured within a few weeks after they started walking. We have outcome measures. This is a high-risk sample as to whether they'll have autism or not in the second and third year of life. We don't have all those data yet, but we have found that both the gait and the postural control correlates with a lot of standard clinical measures, so it's making those predictions. Okay. As I said earlier, autism is a very heterogeneous construct. There's many kinds of autism, many mechanisms, and many phenotypes. Oftentimes in science, but not always, we use statistical models where we have a 1 or a 0. Do you have autism or not? And you do an association study to that, whether it be genetics or other kinds of biological data. There's a mismatch of granularity when you have such a situation. You've got very detailed, informative information on the biological side, but on the psychological side, you have a simple 1 or 0, which masks considerable heterogeneity. So you could use current clinical assessments, but they're kind of global, they're not very granular, they're subjective, they have modest reliability, and they're very expensive and time-consuming. So what we can learn in 5 minutes might take several hours with traditional clinical phenotyping. One way of thinking about this is the richness of the biological data is in some cases squandered by the coarseness of the clinical information. You have a lot of information you're leaving on the table that you can't explain without more detailed phenotyping. So validation of mechanisms is going to require reliable, precise, granular phenotyping. Validation of new treatments, the same thing. I know in speaking to Paul Wong, when he was doing the original arbaclofen treatment studies in Fragile X, he was convinced that there was an effect there. But the data didn't show it. So a lot of effort goes into clinical trials, and if we have better measurements, we may be able to show more convincingly that treatments that are effective are effective. So with that, I will stop there and take questions. Thank you.
I'm Kelsey Martin from the Simons Foundation. Thank you. That was a great talk. So you talked about the monadic and dyadic assessments and the accuracy of the diagnosis. And I'm just curious, what was the ground truth to figure out, what did you use to say that it was accurate?
So this was a clinical sample that we brought in of teenagers and young adults. So they either had a known diagnosis of autism or not.
From an ADOS or from a...
From ADOS and a big
diagnosis.
battery, like a 6-hour battery of tests, yes.
Hi, I'm Cece McBride, also from the Simons Foundation. I have a question about the assessment of the AI as a tool. Knowing that in other applications for AI, there's not always a great understanding across diverse subjects. So how are you all accounting for that for people who may not present the same in terms of gender, race,
That's
that type
a great
of thing?
question. So the question is about diversity, and is AI going to be biased in ways that we need to attend to? Clearly, it can be. It might be. In our analyses so far, we had about 80 kids in our first study, and we didn't have a high representation of minorities. So we did not find any bias in the accuracy of the measurement or in other ways of trying to look at that. We now have over 500 individuals in a new study, and we're just beginning to analyze those. So we will want to look into those. It's possible that the algorithms won't work as well. It's possible that there's other kinds of biases that will be important to look at.
Hi, I have a quick question. So you talked about motor function and language ability and facial expression in different ages, right? Because I saw some infants. So
Right.
Is there something, you put all these things into a computer, or is there one thing that weighs a little bit more than others depending on age, or?
So we're running in parallel streams. So the group of people I showed on my introductory slide, some of them are on the language team and doing computational linguistics. Others are on the motor team. We have a set of shared grants where we're drawing from the same pool. Those grants aren't complete yet. So we're publishing findings on both sides. But aim 3 of one of those grants is to integrate that and ask, what is the information you get from acoustics, from language itself, from gesture, from facial expressions, from motor control? All that information will be addressed at the end. For the infants, that's a separate project where we've actually put this into primary care as a screening device.
Yeah.
So kids who fail the MCHAT at 18 or in one of our very large pediatric clinics in the suburban or West Philly, we're inviting every family that comes in to do that assessment. We want to see if that helps in making predictions and could be realistically used in a clinic. And so far, we've gotten great results in terms of parent feedback, clinician feedback, because it's only 5 minutes. It doesn't take long to do that. So, but the infant results, that's an ongoing project.
Okay. But still, there's not one calculation, right?
Well, computer vision fundamentally is a different model than language modeling, so that they all have their own special niches, because you've got to take the signals that are generated and make them quantitative. And then you have choices to make at that point. Most often people will do some sort of prediction model, like a machine learning model. That's fine and good, but one of the things we've developed is actually for social coordination, a score that once we norm it on a bigger population will be like an IQ score. So it'll be a score that you can put into other models to ask what's mediating that social, or what's moderating that. So are there differences in gender? What about gender and ADHD? How does that affect the score? Whereas prediction is kind of prediction. You're not going to get that information.
I'm curious as to whether you have used or evaluated any of these methods with older adults, and if not, do you have any plans to do so? And the reason I feel this is important is because given that anybody past a certain age or level 1 autistics at least were never diagnosed at the more viable diagnostic ages because the diagnosis didn't exist at the time, and there are probably in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of older adults and senior citizens in the U.S. who are on the spectrum and were never identified, let alone diagnosed. And so something like this could have tremendous potential for doing this.
I agree, and I really appreciate that that comment and that question. Our adult sample, which was a rather small sample, had people up to age 50. But not enough numbers for us to look. I mean, we did look at age effects, but they're not going to be stable with the sample sizes we have. But we think, especially when we move this to Zoom-based data collection, we can reach lots of people quickly. That's the whole point of doing it. It's interesting. We've compared the accuracy of Zoom-based versus in-person, and the accuracy is equal, but by the means by which you get to that accuracy can be different. So, for example, head nodding is a really informative feature in face-to-face communication. On a screen, people drop their head. It's not much head movement going on. So we'll want to do some. That's my way of saying we'll want to do some individuals in the lab, too, to understand those differences. But there's no reason this can't roll out at scale. Finding the people is the biggest challenge. Doing the study is not a big challenge.
We have one over here. Thank you very much for the interesting talk. I'm a clinical psychologist from the Child Mind Institute, and I'm one of the diagnosticians who used ADI and ADOS to diagnose autism. And it was very impressive what AIs can do that humans cannot do in a very short period of time. And I was very impressed by the level of accuracy in detecting autism in the clinical sample. And I'm wondering if the same technology has been applied to non-clinical sample and assessed its ability to not detect autism on people who are not on the spectrum.
So, I mean, not in any systematic way, just as a control group. Our first studies took kids who we know don't have autism or any mental health condition and compared them to those who do. Our larger study that's going on has a group of what we call mixed mental health conditions. We wanted to find out whether the difference between autism and typical kids was really just a difference from typical, right? And what we have found is that people with other mental health conditions but not autism also have social coordination, social communication difficulties. The effect size between the typical and the psychiatric group is not that big. It's much bigger to look at the kids with autism, which have significantly more social coordination problems than the psychiatric control group.
Yes. Dr. Schultz.
Oh, yeah.
Hi. I was just wondering if the digital phenotype AI that you're using, we did something similar with video a while back, and it was very difficult to get coordination of the diagnosticians when they were marking types of behaviors, whether they were ADOS trained or not. So how does AI and that digital software learn to code?
So we're not doing that kind of learn to code. I'm thinking generative AI. We're just using it as a characteristic of the person that we're trying to predict or something that's already been established that we're trying to predict and understand. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time.